You are listening to the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at pmpodcast.blogspot.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to show number 22. I am Cornelius Fischner. Today we are continuing to look into soft skills with my interview guest, Steve Kaye. This episode of the Project Management Podcast is sponsored by Entiplicity Project Management Solutions. Project management is not just about the software. Whether you are a small operation or a large corporation, value-added project management must be based on scalable technology, solid processes, and strategic thinking. Learn more about better strategic project management and your organization. Visit www.weneedpm.com. In my announcements today, I only have one, I would like to apologize to Thushara Vijarvardena. Well, first of all, for completely mispronouncing the name, which I'm probably still doing. But mostly, I wanted to apologize for assuming that she was a he. Please forgive my ignorance in names and also my overconfidence for simply assuming that you were a man. There are so many great women in project management, but somehow in our society, if you don't know who's hiding behind the name, you automatically assume a man. Sorry about that. Well, next I have some listener feedback for you from Thomas Schmidt from Germany. He recently became a PMP and he gave me his view, his impressions on becoming a PMP, and you can compare this to last week's interview that I had with Dale Brown. Thomas writes that he took 2 preparation seminars, PMP prep seminars, at the end of 2004 and one in 2005, which were both paid by for his company. Then he made the mistake of waiting too long to take the exam. In the end, this meant that he had to go back and start from scratch to learn for the new test, to study for the new test based on the PMBOK 2004. He says that to him, however, the certification was really not all that important. More important was the content, the information that he got in these seminars and what he was able to implement in his projects day to day. He estimates that the 4 to 6 weeks of preparation time for him would have been sufficient if he had taken the test initially. He laments then that unfortunately for the PMP certification, the most effective way to take it is really to learn by heart the knowledge areas and the process groups. But like most of us, he's also not able to offer another way of doing the exam. Even though he was studying for the German exam, he also looked at the English terminology, which helped him later on. In hindsight, he also thinks that he should have studied more based on the PMBOK, so read the PMBOK page by page. As far as the exam itself goes, he thinks that there was a lot of text to read in the questions. He answered most of the questions in German, but then, because he also learned the English terminology, he was able to go back and read the question in its original English form. The 4 hours were just about enough for him to go through all the questions and then return to those which he had marked for review. He says that these 4 hours passed enormously quickly. Like Dale, he had no trouble eliminating the first 2 of the 4 answers that were there, but then he had to go back, reread the question, reread it in English sometimes, and then reread the 2 remaining answers as well. That was time-consuming. He finds that the practice questions which he had from his original training, that they were much simpler than what he found on the exam. The location where he took the test was well organized. He says that they had 20 seats and only about 3 seats of those were taken. So it was very quiet and he was able to concentrate well. Which reminds me of my own exam where they had construction going on the outside and I had a nice 4 hours of where I had a background noise of a jackhammer going duk, 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 constantly. Well, that's so much for that. Well, and this is Thomas's feedback to us about his becoming a PMP. If you've recently become a PMP, please don't hesitate to write so we can get a few views from all over the world of people who have taken this exam. And now, let us move on to the helpful resources and project management in the news. I have two helpful resources for you today. Well, actually there are three, but one of them is in the news. Well, you will get to that. The first of the two helpful resources is titled Developing a Test Plan. And I think about 2 weeks ago, we talked about part 1 of this. This is by Neville Turbid of Project Perfect. In part 1, Neville was talking about the actual planning of the setting up of the plan, the who, the where, the how you should do a test plan. And in this part 2 here, from what I can tell, he talks about the what to test. And he goes very much into detail about what you need to test in your software project and what you need to put into your test plan. This is excellent for me personally because I currently have a project, software development project, that is in the stage of testing. So I can actually use this quite well in my day-to-day work. The second helpful resource is by Ken Paul, and it is titled Data Warehouse Project Management. And Ken starts out with the question, why is project management for data warehouse different than most other applications? And he answers this by going through 4 pages of very well written answers. He talks about the project team members, project manager expertise, data warehouse business requirements, data warehouse technical requirements, data warehouse implementation, and in the end he talks about the project manager's litmus test for success. So how can you find out whether or not your data warehouse project was successful? And he gives 3 items that you can look at and define whether or not it was successful. First of all, if users are constantly knocking on your door and asking for more information than the data warehouse can actually give them, that's good because they're using it. So that's success criteria number 1. Number 2 is the buzz in the hallway mentions the data warehouse. So if people talk about it constantly, it's successful. And lastly, when the data warehouse becomes the heartbeat of the business, where decisions are made from the data intelligence it provides, once again, you have succeeded. And those are my 2 helpful resources for today. And now, let's continue with the news. As mentioned, I have 2 news items for you today, and the first one actually is more of a helpful resource, but since it says News Story by Mary Kaye Pratt, I put it under the news. It is titled How to Write a Progress Report. Everyone does it, but few do it well. Here is how. And then Mary gives you the blueprint of writing a great progress report, or status report if you wish. She talks about setting expectations, nailing down the essentials, keeping it simple, fine-tuning it to your audience, and knowing the media with which you are going to deliver this progress or status report. So if you're currently thinking about improving the quality of your progress report, this is a good read for you. The second news item is titled PMI's Chair and CEO Answer Questions on Community Transformation Project. Well, if you've listened to the earliest shows of the Project Management Podcast, the ones which came from Toronto, Canada, where I attended a leadership seminar, you may remember that one of the items in there was the fact that the PMI at this point is no longer chartering new chapters or SIGs or colleges. They've put everything a little bit on hold because they have started their community transformation project. This news item here, is a short read about the current status of this particular project for you. And that's the news and helpful resources for this week. And as always, go to pmpodcast.blogspot.com where you will find links to all 4 items that I had for you today. And now, let us move on with the project management tip of the week. The Project Management Podcast's tip of the week this week is: step back from your project and take some time to plan. Well, many of us project managers are also project doers. That is to say, you are also a contributing project team member. You have your own deliverables on the project. You're not just a full-time PM. Well, maybe you're testing, maybe you are the analyst, maybe you are the engineer who is going to deliver a new and exciting technological advance. Nevertheless, first and foremost, you are the PM on your project. Now, don't let your deliverables ever detract you from that. You have to take time out from your deliverables and work on being a project manager. Here are the two main things that you need to do for that. First of all, you have to keep on top of the project progress. Talk to your team members or hold weekly status meetings. No matter how you do it, you have to learn what the status of the deliverables is so that you can either support your team members in continuing their current path or take corrective action. Second, you have to plan the next steps on your project. Planning is ongoing. You can't just simply create a project plan at the beginning of your project and then follow it blindly all the way to your end. You have to revise it. The way that works best for me personally is by leaving my desk. So I get up, I go over to a meeting room to be undisturbed and take some time out to think. The tool that I use for that is a few empty sheets of paper. And on those, on the left-hand side, I write down my, problems, issues, tasks, anything that comes to mind. On the very right-hand side, I then write down where I want to go to. So on the left, I have what is it? On the right, where do I want to go to? And then I start filling in the middle. First, I start by writing down alternatives. To reach this goal, I can either go down this road or I can go down that road. Once I have all these alternatives down, I'll make a decision as to which I think will be more successful. And then I write down the individual steps that I have to take in order to reach my goal. When I'm satisfied with the results of what I have written down, I get up, I go back to my desk, and I put my plan into action. Well, there you have it. This week's Project Management Podcast Tip of the Week. Step back from your project and take some time to plan. As always, the background music came from music.podshow.com. The artist that you heard is Charlie Crow. He is a guitarist from Tennessee, and of course, the song was called 007. Next is the main section of our show, the interview about meetings.
The Project Management Podcast Feature Interview. Today, with Steve Kaye, consultant and meeting facilitator.
Fellow project managers, we are continuing to look at soft skills that you need as a project manager. And with me today is Steve Kaye, and we are going to take a look at meetings. Hello, Steve, and welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you.
Well, Steve, let's start with you first here. You were working for chemical engineering. You were working for companies like DuPont, Chevron. How on earth did you ever go from there to what you're doing today?
That's a good question. And the answer could be long, so I'll have to manage myself because we could spend an hour just talking about this past. It's an evolution. I began a career with a PhD in chemical engineering.
Right.
And my hope was to make that a lifetime career. Mm-hmm. In fact, when I interviewed DuPont, they talked about joining the DuPont family, implying that this was a long commitment.
Right.
And then things change. I decided after almost 4 years with DuPont that I wanted to do something else. Mm-hmm. I had been moved from research into process engineering. I wanted to go back to research, and so I moved myself. I moved from DuPont to Gulf Oil at their research center in Pittsburgh. They moved us to Houston. Chevron bought Gulf. I was part of what Chevron kept, and so now I moved to California. The course of this completely shredded the concept of long-term stable career.
Right.
Because I'm bumped and bounced because of corporate moves, some mine, some theirs. And that was like strike one, if you will. One tap. Then other things changed. There are reorganizations, there are layoffs.
Yeah.
All of these are very troubling. Finally, things came to a point where the company was going to hold a major reorganization. They were going to lose a fourth of the engineering staff. The possibilities that I saw ahead of me were possibilities I did not want.
Yes.
Jobs I did not want. I could tell that the project I was on would be canceled.
Okay.
And so I decided I'm taking charge. I left.
Okay.
Now, the build-up to that had been many, many years with Toastmasters, hundreds of Toastmaster speeches, winning many, many contests, being involved in many other activities. And so I reached a point where I thought, I think I could make a business as a professional speaker, as a trainer, as a consultant, and it's just a matter of working through the steps so that I can have such a business. I remember telling a vice president, I know what to do, I just don't know if it'll work. And he smiled. But that's the truth. I have to go out there and find out if it'll work.
Did it work?
It worked.
Wonderful.
Oh.
Now, how did you get interested in meetings?
I've been interested in meetings even when I was an employee.
Yes.
And also, a major shift occurred when I volunteered to be the chair of an issues committee for a local civic organization.
Yes.
And as the chair of this committee, I was responsible for convening a committee of citizens, many who had no business experience at all. And our charter was to develop plans or make recommendations on how we could improve our committee. And I discovered that if you do some very, very simple things that I do now, and I do them professionally, things where you simply have a plan, you have an agenda, you have a list of questions. You ask the people the questions, you write down their answers. You treat them with respect as if their answers have value and meaning. And then you write up a report on what you've done. You can accomplish an incredible amount of work in a very short amount of time.
Right.
And again, with people who have no experience doing this. And my takeaway from this was, imagine what you could do with people who had business experience, who had the discipline and the focus and the skills that are brought to business by executives and leaders. You could accomplish a huge amount of work. And then I compare that with some absolutely horrible meetings I'd been in. Meetings where people misbehaved, where they insulted each other, or meetings where tremendous amounts of time and money were wasted.
Yes.
A quick example. Once I was called to a meeting in Houston. So we fly from California to Houston. We attend a meeting. There are at least 30, maybe 35 people in this room. They are supervisors, managers, senior scientists. The man who called the meeting had no agenda. Result, they spent 2 days bickering and arguing and complaining and explaining to each other why individual ideas were impossible. You know, that meeting probably cost the company, in 1980 dollars, probably the order of $40,000.
Great.
If you take the cost of all the payroll money and the travel.
Oh, of course.
And the fact that you took this group of exceptional people, put them in a room for 2 days where they accomplished nothing. This is terrible.
Yes.
And true, this is a large corporation, but you know, 40,000 here, 50,000 here, it adds up. And even for a big company,
meetings are expensive, yes.
It can be very expensive.
All right.
And if you were to go to a top executive and say, I want to waste $40,000 next week, you'd bring back some very strange looks, and you might find that you're talking about your continued employment.
Yes.
So combined with the waste of money, waste of resources, as well as the lost opportunity,
yes,
I saw a tremendous need to help things in business. It's just like any other business project. Consider this. There is no project manager who would embark on a project that was designed to lose money for the company. It's unlikely they would do this deliberately.
There are certain instances where you have to, for instance, regulations.
Okay, but these are maintenance type
Yes.
activities.
Yes.
And yet, even a maintenance activity, like your health, like going for walks or exercising, these do have a benefit.
Correct.
They may cost, and yet they have a benefit.
You're not intentionally trying to lose money.
You're not intentionally trying to lose money. No business project would begin with a deliberate, known,
we're going to lose money on
negative
this.
ROI.
Yes.
Nobody would say, we're going to embark on a project, we're going to spend $5 million on this project, and when we're finished, we'll be $10 million in the hole.
Okay. Yeah. Now, let's take a step back and look at meetings from a purely theoretical point of view. What is a meeting?
A meeting is a business activity where a group of select people gather to work on a task that requires group effort.
Okay.
Now let's take this apart. As a business activity, it should be designed to earn a profit.
Yes.
It's a team activity. That means it represents teamwork. And like any good team activity, this means the people are working for the good of the organization rather than for individual gain. They're select people. These are people who are brought together only for the purpose of their contributions.
Right.
So this means we leave out spectators, and there have been cases where people have a disagreement. They try to pack the room with their supporters, and so now they line up like soldiers in a medieval conflict, and it's a matter of who can have the most people on their side of the room.
So in other words, invite the right people.
You invite the right people.
Don't invite people that are just ballast.
That's right. We invite people only who can make meaningful contributions.
Right.
And just to extend on that, we want a small group, 6 to 8 people, 10, 12 max, and that's it.
Okay.
And then here's the tricky part. They're there working on a task that requires group effort. If this task can be completed by an individual or 2 people or a small group of people, then that task should be given to those people and let them take care of it.
You don't need a meeting for that.
You don't need a
right?
meeting.
Okay. We've already talked about what meetings are like in most companies. It reminds me very much of the Dilbert cartoons occasionally. What causes these bad meetings?
The number one cause of bad meetings is a complete lack of planning. It's really simple. People call a meeting without having a clearly thought out goal, or they have a goal in mind and they neglect to tell others what it is. This is like Fantasyland, where they hope a group of diverse people will come together knowing their secret goal, and that they will also bring with themselves a common approach to reaching that goal.
Right.
But many times people do not have a clear goal in mind, and then they have no plan for obtaining any goal. They will call a meeting just to talk about something, or they will call a meeting almost out of a knee-jerk reaction. We need to fix this.
Yes.
Those meetings are destined, guaranteed to be disastrous.
You're telling me that a meeting is a mini project.
It's a project, absolutely.
It should have a goal, it should have a statement, a purpose, it should have a plan, it should have everything that project managers do in a regular project. Put it into your meeting.
A meeting is exactly like a project, and it contains all the elements of a successful project. Can you imagine embarking on a project without having a goal? It's as if somebody came to you and say, we want you to gather together a half dozen people, form a team, and then just work on a project. And you say, this sounds fine. What should I work on? You just work on a project. I mean, this is ludicrous.
It is.
And yet there are very highly paid people who call meetings with about that much intelligence behind it.
Now, what is a meeting facilitator?
A meeting facilitator is somebody who would take over the planning, the conduct, and the documentation of a meeting.
Okay.
It's an expert who you bring in who helps you with the meeting. We're not talking about some random person who might be a loading dock clerk or the person who's bored or unoccupied that day.
Right.
properly done, a meeting facilitator is someone who is skilled in many, many areas, because facilitating a meeting involves a lot more than just watching people talk. A meeting facilitator is more than a referee.
Okay.
Quick insight. I was talking about meetings and meeting facilitation, and someone asked, how do you deal with disruptive behavior in your meetings? And at first, that was a surprising question because I never have disruptive behavior.
So how do you manage not to have disruptive behavior?
The answer is you create a process and an environment that makes it impossible to misbehave.
Okay, now I have to ask the next question. How do you do that?
You create a process that is so directed that it's very easy to behave properly.
What does the process have to look like?
The process will be different for each meeting.
Oh.
And this is part of where,
So you can't go cookie cutter.
well, you sort of can. I work with some very basic steps, and then the reality of the steps can change meeting to meeting. I'll give you
Yes.
some examples. My basic steps, once we're in a meeting, in fact, let me step out of this a bit. We're going to begin the meeting by stating the goal for the meeting, reviewing the agenda for the meeting,
Yes.
and reviewing the outcome, which is the benefit of working on
Yes.
this. So we're going to explain to people over the course of maybe 2 minutes why we're meeting, what we're going to get out of this meeting, and how we're going to go about it. Now we're in the meeting. My basic steps are, first, gather ideas from people. And there are many ways to gather ideas.
Okay.
Once we gather the ideas, then we will refine and process the ideas. And that could mean that we examine the ideas we have and combine duplicates, which is one type of refinement.
Right.
Another might be that we use some discussion process so that everybody has an opportunity to voice a comment,
Yes.
express a view. After we've gone through this refinement, analysis, discussion process, then we make a decision. And we typically make a decision through some sort of voting or prioritization process.
Now, most of the meetings that I'm involved in my projects, are meetings where we get together to discuss issues. Like,
Sure.
we have a problem in one part of our project. What are we
Okay.
going to do about this?
Okay.
Now, how can a facilitator help me with these kind of projects?
Okay.
Meetings.
And in fact, we can go through all the things that a facilitator would
Yes,
do.
yes,
Because
please.
as I said, a facilitator does more than just watch. A facilitator would first talk to the client and understand from the client, what do you want to accomplish?
Yes.
So the facilitator would work with the client to obtain a goal for the meeting and make sure that it was a clear goal that everybody agreed was the goal.
Yes.
Then the facilitator would work with the client to develop an agenda, and the agenda would be the sequence of group process steps that would be taken to accomplish it.
Yes.
And depending upon the type of goal and the type of meeting, and even the culture wrapped around this, we might use different process steps. If it's a simple issue that's straightforward, that's one type. If it's controversial, we might need something else. If there's any emotional intensity, we might need something else. Okay. Then a good facilitator would contact the key participants and sometimes all of the participants to review with them the goal, review with them the agenda, and hear their story and their concerns or comments about it. I think this is a very important part of the meeting because it diffuses energy sometimes. It tells the facilitator a huge amount of information, tells where the answers are, where the holes are. I facilitated a meeting where the group had identified someone as being the problem person. This is an individual who had disrupted every meeting they had ever held, and they were very angry with this person. This was the one person I wanted to talk to before the meeting, and so I called, identified myself as the facilitator for a meeting coming up, and this person had a lot to say. Anger and dumping and venting and complaining. I listened for 45 minutes.
Yes.
Key thing, let me repeat this. I listened for 45
Yes.
minutes.
You didn't talk. He talked.
I just let this person go on with occasional comments like, interesting. Then what, and just leading
Yes.
questions. Wonderful. Because when we're done, I knew where all the soft spots were, and I had heard all the stories.
Yes.
When we finally got together for the meeting, this was a working participant. Why? because this person had already told all the stories.
Okay.
There was no need to repeat them. And besides that, I knew where all the soft spots were, so I could gently and diplomatically and easily steer the group around issues that might have pressed this person's buttons. Point is, facilitators contact key people, talk to them, hear their stories, inform them about what's going to happen, and in general, set the stage for success.
Okay.
Then the agenda is built upon group activities. The group activities are founded in the concepts of fair process, of equitable participation, and shared success.
Right.
And when people are in that type of an environment, they behave well. People behave poorly when they feel threatened. People behave poorly when they're under duress, when they're under stress. And there are many types of misbehavior. However, when people feel that they are participating in a fair process, they will always cooperate.
Okay.
And so this answers the question.
Yes.
Why do you never have any problems? Because I create a fair process.
The environment.
I create an environment that's conducive toward good behavior. I set everybody up for success. And it's known that when we're done, we will have a result that everybody can live with.
Now that definitely works for meetings that are like planning meetings, off-site meetings, meetings that you know way in advance that we're going to do this is important, we need someone to come in and help us create an atmosphere in which we can work.
Yes.
But what about the, we got to meet tomorrow and talk about this issue
Okay.
kind of meeting?
Suppose you have an emergency.
Yes.
And you need to meet. Even if it's an emergency, I would strongly urge you to pause for what might be 5 minutes and ask yourself some very important questions. And I would encourage you to write out your answers. And the key questions are, what result do I want to have when this meeting is over? And I really stress this. Many people think through this. They may think through it while they're walking to the meeting, and they have something that may play well in their mind, and yet it's still incomplete.
Right.
The power of writing something out is that once you have written it out, you can read it. You can review it, you can revise it, you retain it. It makes it real. When people just imagine things, they are really hoping for almost miracles.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's hard to run a business on fantasy.
Here's something that I do when I send invitations, and I want you to tell me if I'm doing the right thing. We use Outlook in my company. So I send a meeting invitation to the people that I feel need to be present in this meeting. Okay. And I tell them when it is, I give it a subject that is succinct, and in the text I always write, the purpose of this meeting is, and then I write a few key statements about what I feel the purpose of this meeting is. Is this already a good start, or where do I need to improve even more?
This is a good start. The fact that you're writing out the purpose of the meeting and sending that to the people who you're inviting is a good step, because the process of writing it out is forcing you to confront what it is.
Yes.
And when you put something in text, you're forcing yourself to think about the words and the completeness of your idea.
Yes.
So that's very, very positive.
Now, you've told me so much already about how to facilitate a meeting. Can I now just go back to my company and facilitate my own meetings, or do I need somebody to come in, an external person?
Here's the catch. First, yes, you can facilitate your own meetings.
Okay.
And recognize you'll be meeting with key people, you'll be developing a goal, you'll be developing a plan, you'll be guiding people through that, and then you'll be documenting it when it's over.
Right.
The catch is this. Those activities are so consuming in terms of the energy and focus that they take from you. This is all you'll be able to do.
So you do not actually participate yourself in the meeting?
You will make it impossible for yourself to participate if you are working as a good facilitator.
Okay.
And it gets even more complicated. If you attempt to participate in a meeting where you're facilitating, you then risk contaminating the process.
Of course. Yes.
And the reason for that is the facilitator ideally is working as a neutral servant helping a group of people find their best result. As soon as you participate, the neutrality disappears. As soon as you start contributing ideas or telling people what to do, then they will say, well, if you already know this, why should I contribute? Or if you manage the process in such a way that you orchestrate your favorite result, people will sense that they've been hoaxed. They will doubt that it was a fair process. And you could end up with a result that seems good in the moment and dissolves once the meeting is over.
So, in other words, if you have a meeting where you cannot bring in a facilitator, set it up in such a way that you enable a good environment, but don't try to be a facilitator.
It can be, yes, the middle ground. I think what you're seeking is the middle ground. By all means, have a plan and develop an agenda.
Right.
And then to the extent that you can, take the people through that. The tricky part is it's the leadership of the meeting, where if you are truly focused on managing the process, it's very hard to participate.
Yes.
I think it's possible to find a facilitator. Many years ago, I was president of the Los Angeles chapter of the National Speakers Association.
Right.
I thoroughly understand meetings. By that time, I had already written 2 books on how to hold meetings. And still, I asked someone to serve as a parliamentarian because we were using parliamentary procedures.
Yes.
And I asked someone else to work as a facilitator. And I did that because as the president of this association, it's very important that I participate in the meetings.
Yeah, of course.
And so I handed off these tasks to 2 other people, asking them to help me. This made very good sense to me. And so I'll even take this to the point where you may believe that you could facilitate your own meeting more effectively than someone else. And yet you may have to sacrifice that so that you can participate in your own meeting.
What about video conferences, conference calls? Is there any way that you can facilitate that?
Yes. Good question. Those are 2 different types of meetings. So let's take perhaps the easier one, a teleconference call. I recommend having a facilitator or a traffic controller for a for a teleconference.
Yes.
And in this case, you have somebody who acts almost like a traffic controller. The reason this is useful is you have a number of people, all at different locations, and they're participating in a meeting without the benefit of being able to see each other.
Yes.
And if you have somebody who's a traffic controller, the least this person can do is manage who talks when and keep the conversation on the same channel. And that person can also work to implement the agenda and make sure people are on track and working toward the goal for the meeting.
Yes.
The meeting facilitator can also, to the extent possible, be jotting down notes if it's possible. You may even want to assign the job of scribe to somebody else to document the meeting, or you might want to record the meeting.
Now, you said that the teleconference is easier than the video conference?
A video conference can be much more complicated, depending upon how it's set up.
Yes.
A video conference can go across a huge range. It can, at one end, it could be a video conference where people are using a little camera that's attached to or part of their desk computer system, and then it's almost like a teleconference, except now people can see each other. That's fairly simple. And true, here you could have a facilitator also working as a traffic controller. A more complex video conference would be one that's held in a conference room where the different parties are each in their own conference room. And now we're bringing in video cameras, and these can become very complex depending upon how sophisticated and complex the equipment is. And in some cases, high-end video conferences will bring in a videographer who manages the video camera.
Yes.
or they have video cameras that are robot controlled and will aim toward whoever is
You're
talking.
speaking, yes.
These get expensive.
Yeah.
And they get expensive because the equipment is expensive, they're technically
Time is
complicated.
expensive, yeah.
There's a lot of work required to set these up and
Yes.
make sure that everything is done properly. So they could require an extensive amount of support system, and expensive facilities. However, these type meetings could be very useful where face-to-face contact in an executive or in a conference room setting is important. It may be a meeting that's attended by people who may not have cameras on their computers, such as senior executives. Or there may be some logistical, some cultural reason for having this type of meeting. Those get very complicated.
I see why you're saying that they are more difficult to manage than a teleconference.
You could have a whiteboard with a facilitator in each of the rooms.
Yes.
And that person would also be picked up on another camera or creating white text on a whiteboard that is transmitted to everybody else. These become technically and logistically
fancy almost.
They're very fancy.
Yes.
And yet some people do this and think it's useful.
Let's go to the other extreme. One of my favorite bosses back home in Switzerland, he had a trick. He did stand-up meetings. If we had a meeting where we had to get together for a short time to talk about some issue, really, get your heads together, discuss an issue that we have, come up with a solution, then leave again and implement what we discussed about. He did a stand-up meeting.
Okay.
We met at almost like a bistro table that was in chest height, and we put our documents on this table, and we stood around this table, we discussed it, we left again. How do you feel about this kind of meetings?
It's fine. Here's an important consideration. If you're going to use a special technique, make sure that you're using the technique to obtain a valid and a valuable result.
Right.
Rather than just using a gimmick for the sake of a gimmick.
Okay.
A stand-up meeting, I think, would work well for a meeting that's intended to last 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's about the maximum that we did usually.
And in that case, it's fine.
Right.
Research has shown that when people stand up, they have a shorter meeting significantly, maybe like a third less. So a stand-up meeting can be useful. Make sure that you've planned an agenda and an entire flow process that's consistent with a stand-up meeting. And I'll even add, many of the group techniques that I use in my meetings are designed to get people up and out of their chairs, because when people are moving around, their blood is moving better, they're more dynamic, they're more interactive. It just contributes to a far more effective process.
Yes. Now let's say you're in a meeting and you have a problem person. First of all, why, from your point of view and your experience, why do people misbehave? And second, what can you do during the meeting to stop them misbehaving?
You've asked a big question.
We should only ask one question at a time.
It's okay.
Let's start with the first one. Why do people misbehave?
People will misbehave for a variety of reasons, and they fall under a few simple headings. One of them is they found it useful.
Oh, serious. It worked in the past, so let's continue
worked in the
doing it.
past.
Okay.
They have been a bully. They have found that if they rant, rave, yell, demand, act stubborn, they end up with more of what they want. And sometimes what they want is their way, and other times it's avoiding accountability or responsibility. I remember many years ago, when I was in a job, there was a very highly placed executive who was such a tyrant, people were afraid to confront this man. And so he basically acted independently of any rules, any guidance, any structure. He did whatever he wanted to because he was such a tyrant. People were afraid to confront him. He also wasted a lot of money for the company.
There we go again. Right?
It's
the benefit of bad meeting. We're wasting money.
Well, on one project, this guy wasted over $50 million.
Ouch.
And a senior VP went to talk to him about it and came home and said, well, I just was afraid to bring it up. And I hear things like this. It's like, I can't imagine people in major corporations behaving this way. It's reality. Anyhow, one reason people misbehave is it has worked in the past. Another reason people misbehave is they're under stress. They're in pain.
Okay.
And they're in pain for a variety of reasons. We can make a list, and you may even think of others. They're in pain because they disagree with what's going on. They're in pain because they expect to be hurt. They're in pain because others have insulted them. They're in pain because they sense this is an unfair process. They're in pain because they feel at risk.
Yeah, the list can go on.
It goes on and on.
Right?
And so the key to confronting misbehavior is, one, making it difficult for people to get away with it. That is, it does not work today. It produces a different result than the run that they've gotten in the past. And the other is to recognize and confront the pain. Now, I'll go back to the beginning. In most cases, if you create a fair process that is an interactive process based on consensus that involves everybody, it becomes very difficult for people to misbehave. And if they do, it becomes so extraordinary that the group almost tells the person to cut it out, or it's easy to stop it as soon as it appears. But in general, if people misbehave in meetings because they feel like they're being slammed, or they feel like they're being set up, they feel like they're wasting their time.
Okay.
And we can go through these one by one.
Yeah.
Suppose someone's in a meeting and the person's upset because they think the meeting's a waste of time. Get them so involved in the meeting they feel that their contributions are useful. Also, plan a short meeting. If someone knows that they're going to be in a room for 4 hours and they have a pile of work waiting on their desk to be done, they're going to be upset. Compare that with they're in a room and they know that after 30 minutes they're
out of here. They can go back. Then they want to make sure that it's over after 30 minutes.
And you tell them, we have 30 minutes, we're going to work hard, we value your contributions, you're all going to contribute, let's go. 30 minutes, I can put up with this. And also, when people have a role in a meeting, they say, I'm contributing. If people feel they're not contributing, they get upset.
Right.
If people feel that a meeting is poorly managed, poorly led,
yes,
they get upset.
Now, let's say I'm in one of these meetings and I'm not the leader. I'm not the person who's rambling. I'm just the poor guy stuck in there.
Yes.
What do I do?
It depends. I'll say this again. It depends. This is the global response to hard questions like this. It depends. Let's work through some scenarios. You're stuck in a meeting. You are not in charge of the meeting. The person in charge of the meeting is very senior to you. And this person has a history of being mean and vindictive. This person has fired other people. You would probably be well served to just sit there and enjoy the show.
Yes.
Because if you attempt to intervene, even the most subtle intervention could be misunderstood and could bring bad news back to you.
Unless, of course, you already have another job lined up. Then.
Yes, if you already have another job lined up. And in fact, if people ask me about careers and they tell me that they're working for a dictator or some type of horrible boss, I would say, look, decide whether you want to put up with this or find something else.
Yes.
Now, if you do have something lined up, fine, you let it go, enjoy yourself. One extreme, though, is if you sense that there is no chance of a positive outcome, then you're stuck. Because if you attempt to intervene, you'll bring damage to yourself. Unless you want to bring damage to yourself, which I think is unlikely. Let's go to the other end. Let's assume that you're in a room with people who might be receptive to some type of intervention. Then you can begin by asking gentle, diplomatic, guiding questions.
Like, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve?
That's right. You can ask questions like, why did you call this meeting? Or how can we help you? what would you like to accomplish today?
Mm-hmm.
What was your goal for this meeting? And you may hear answers like, well, gee, I hadn't thought of that.
Yes.
And admittedly, these may make you feel like you're going to smile or burst out laughing. Story.
It's probably happened to you, right?
Here's a story. There's this administrative assistant working at her desk, and she's been working at her desk while her boss, a vice president, has been holding a meeting in his office. After a meeting for half an hour, the vice president comes to his door and calls out to the administrative assistant, "Hey, do you remember why I called this meeting?" And it makes you wonder what this VP and those other people had been doing in that room for half an hour.
Half an hour, yes.
Yes. And if you add up the cost of this, it's a lot of money because those are expensive people. Point is, this happens in the real world. If you receive an answer like, gee, I hadn't thought of that, then you might begin a gentle dialogue with something like, well, since I've raised the question, what do you think? What would you like to do? Or how could we use this time? And if the person says, well, I really don't know, you could say, I have a suggestion, and you might want to wrap it around a disclaimer where you'd say, I have a kind of a weird suggestion. How about if we adjourn this meeting right now, and I'd be glad to come and talk to you about possible goal and help you set up your next meeting so that we can really use the time well.
Right.
Because without having a clear purpose, we're most likely going to sit here and just talk. And although that's enjoyable, it seldom accomplishes a lot.
Yeah.
See, discussion, which is the most popular form of a meeting, is the least effective, least efficient way of going to a result.
What is the most effective way?
Using some structured group activity.
Okay.
And those will depend upon the type of issue you're working on and the culture that wraps around it. And there are a variety of such techniques, and those are the core of the books and the workshops that I conduct.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about, and this is something that you learn in project management, you have to have a weekly meeting with your project team where you get them together and you discuss the status.
True.
Joe, how's your thing going? Susan, what are you doing? Do you have any
Sure.
issues? How do you feel about these kind of meetings?
They can be useful. It depends upon how they're done. Again, we're going to use a structure, a structured process. Rather than reserve a room for 4 hours or 8 hours,
Yes.
order a bunch of treats, and camp out for a whole day, we're going to make this a very focused meeting. This project review meeting, for example, might last half an hour. And people would be instructed that they will have 2 minutes to give a project update. And we will bring a timer, and the timer goes off. When the timer goes off, their 2 minutes is up.
Right.
So this will force people to speak in headlines, very concisely, very briefly. And in fact, we can make it a little more interesting. So let's create an agenda here. We'll begin by perhaps having a 2-minute overall general purpose news update on the global news of the business or the project by the project leader. And then the meeting begins where each person receives, let's say, 2 minutes. And this can vary. It could be a minute, could be 5 minutes.
Depending on the size of the project.
And how much they may have. Although less time is better than more time because it forces people to prioritize and to be concise. So for the case of this, we give everybody 2 minutes. At the end of each person's presentation, we then open the room up or the meeting up to 2 minutes of feedback, comments, and questions, which would be the group's response to that person's 2-minute report. So now we have 4 minutes per person.
Yes.
And if we had, say, 8 people, it's 4 times 8, 32 minutes. It's about a half-hour meeting.
Right.
35 minutes, we're outside.
Now, while we're talking about time, what's the right duration of a meeting? Is that one of those it depends questions again?
It somewhat is it depends, although I would urge a sense of urgency. Because time is precious. If you're wasting time in a meeting, then you're not spending that time on the tasks that you were really hired to perform.
Yes.
I doubt any project manager would find in the job description a statement that says, attend meetings.
Yes, I've never seen that.
Unlikely. And even worse would be spend most of your day in meetings.
That's actually my day today was like that. I think I was in 4 or 5 separate meetings today.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. I have talked to people who tell me, I spend all day in meetings, and I ask, when do you get work done? And they usually respond by saying, work?
Yeah.
As if, oh, I take it home.
I don't do that.
This is
I'm not at that point
this
yet.
is a bad thing.
Not at that point
Meetings need to be as short as possible. If you have a large issue, if possible, I would encourage you to break that large issue up into small pieces.
Yes.
And then, if it's appropriate, hold many little meetings.
Okay.
Or if you're going to hold a meeting that must last a long time, and by long time I mean over hours, 3-4 hours, take a break every hour. Take a 10-minute break every hour, which means you work for 50 minutes, you take a 10-minute break, and you encourage people to go out into the hall and walk briskly around or climb stairs, because you have to get the blood moving, you have to get your body moving. Otherwise, when people just sit in a room for like 4 hours straight, they almost begin to take on the form of plants. They become as useful as plants. You can feel roots beginning to form in the seat of the chair.
Yeah.
Really, after a while, people, they become useless. They may still be there, and yet functionally they're useless.
Now, we have established meetings are important.
Yes.
Meetings can waste a lot of time.
Yes.
Meetings can be dull. Meetings can be unproductive.
Yes.
Why don't we change?
We don't change for a couple of reasons. One is many people just do not know how to hold an effective meeting. Another reason is it's a false sense of efficiency. People think that they're too busy to set a goal or prepare an agenda. They're too busy to call key participants and review with them the purpose of the meeting, or to check if there are any lurking issues that they need to know about.
Yes.
So, since they're too busy to take care of those things, they simply call a meeting. The trade-off is, rather than hold a meeting that lasts 30 minutes and accomplishes something, they hold a 4-hour meeting that accomplishes nothing. And so this false efficiency is terrible. By saving what might be a half hour on the front end, they lose 3 hours on the back end. Another reason people hold bad meetings is they find it useful. And this is sad. You see, an effective meeting produces a result. And a result means somebody must implement it. And implementation requires responsibility and leads to accountability. When there are no results, it's possible for absolute bozos to appear brilliant, because all they have to do is show up at a meeting and talk wonderfully for as long as the meeting lasts, and yet they're never held to task for accomplishing anything.
Right.
And so those organizations that want the loudest, flashiest people to end up in charge will avoid holding effective meetings, because those are the people who will seem to excel. More seriously, people who are afraid of accountability, responsibility, or the difficulty of tasks that require disciplined work will subconsciously gravitate toward a process that never produces a result.
To wrap it up, what would your suggestion, your tip be to project managers out there? What can they do to hold effective meetings?
Since we're talking to project managers, who are truly a very skilled group of people, because a project is a complex activity, I would urge them to treat a meeting as if it were a project. Use everything that you know about project management and apply it to a meeting. And if you do that, you will figure out everything that you need to know so that you can hold a meeting that works.
All right. Now, for those who are interested in learning more about this, you have a regular newsletter. What do you talk about in this newsletter?
I talk about topics related to meetings as well as topics related to leadership. and I try to find some unusual or novel angle that causes people to say, aha. So it's a good newsletter.
All right.
People can subscribe to that newsletter from my website.
Yes, that is stevekaye.com, I believe.
Yes.
And as always, there will be a link on my blog. All right. And if I remember correctly, if you sign up for the newsletter, there is also an article that you get for free?
Yes. If you sign up for the newsletter, I will send you a free report. It's titled 7 Myths About Meetings. Also, you'll receive a copy of the last issue. And by the way, if you go to my website, you'll find over 120 pages of articles and other valuable information about meetings and leadership.
Yes. You mentioned earlier you had written books.
I've written books.
Are they available through Amazon?
Some are available from Amazon. Also, they're available from the bookstore that's on my website.
Ah, okay. So you have a bookstore on your website.
I have a bookstore on my website.
All can get
And
there.
if you have any questions, send an email to me. You can do that from the website or call me up.
Right. Now, if somebody is interested in employing you as a meeting facilitator, how would they go about doing that?
The first step is to call me.
Yes.
And when you call me, expect that we'll have a conversation. I will ask many questions about your group, your meeting, your agenda, your goal, and on and on. I will probably ask some of these questions many, many ways because I want to thoroughly understand what you want to accomplish and to make sure that we have a good fit. If we are unable to have a good fit, then I'll do my best to recommend something else.
Right. Now, we have to make it clear, you not only facilitate meetings, you have other talents as well.
Yes, I conduct workshops that teach people, show people how to conduct meetings. My workshop, by the way, on business meetings, puts people through a series of miniature meetings where they can experience the techniques of being in an effective meeting as well as applying techniques that make the meeting effective.
Right.
It's a fabulous workshop. I've received comments across the board where people tell me it's the best program they ever attended. And then I have other workshops on skills related to holding meetings, and you can find details of those on my website.
Conversations, presentations, relationships, right?
Communication skills, business presentations. The program on business presentation shows techniques used by professional speakers that are applicable in a business environment. So how can you impress others with your presentation? By doing an outstanding job. Many people give presentations just like they conduct meetings. They wing it. They show up and hope for something special. And unfortunately, something special does happen, and it disappoints everybody.
On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you
for having been on the show. I really enjoyed talking to you, as always.
This was a pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. There's going to be no show next week because I have a very important personal project that I need to focus on. It's called filling in your tax forms. But even so, you will be hearing my voice next week because I will be trying something new. So just keep listening to this channel. As always, you can find us on the web at pmpodcast.blogspot.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. At the heart of every large project is a small project trying to get out. With that, take heart to the words that Tom Mokal wrote in this week's Tech Republic newsletter. He wrote, "Take responsibility for problems that you cause." Yes, as a project manager, you have to have the backbone to say that it is your fault. So if you mess up, fess up. Until next time.